Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Screen Daily Talk. I'm Matt Mueller, the editor of Screen International and ScreenDaily.com, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Ben Roberts, Chief Executive of the BFI, and Harriet Finney, Deputy CEO and Executive Director of Corporate and Industry Affairs, to discuss the BFI's Screen Culture 2033 strategy. The 10-year strategy was unveiled on Friday, and it sets out a highly ambitious and comprehensive roadmap for the BFI to take it to its centenary year in 2033. I will let Ben and Harriet do most of the talking on their vision and plans for Screen Culture 2033, but just to pick out a few points, the strategy sets out a plan for the BFI to evolve to become, I quote, a resilient, sustainable, digital-first and diverse operation with a plurality of voices, and is underpinned by key ambitions that include diversifying the BFI audience, embracing a wider definition of screen culture, building long-term strategies for education and skills, and growing the cultural and economic impact of the UK's screen industries. And doing all of this with less money to start with, given a reduction in national lottery funds, certainly for the initial 3-year phase of the strategy, but with a plan to increase its own income by 10% in the ensuing decade. So the format for today's 1-hour talk is that I'm going to be putting questions to Ben and Harriet that have been sent in to us since the strategy document was released on Friday. We've received some great questions. We'll try to get through as many of those as we can. We'll also leave some time at the end as well for questions from today's live audience. Those will be fielded by my colleague Orlando Parfit, who will be roaming the chat room, and he'll curate a selection to send on to me. So Ben and Harriet, thank you very much for joining us today. It's great to have you both here. And the first thing to say is huge congratulations on the Screen Culture 2033 strategy. It's an extremely comprehensive and impressive vision. And I know you will have been spending much of this year leading up to now putting it together. So maybe just to start off with, could you tell me what was the timeline? How long have you been working on this, Ben? Was it something you picked up on as soon as you sort of took on the role, or it looks like it's been years?
Yeah, kind of. I think I did one of these webinars with you, Matt, during lockdown, during the first lockdown. And I think even at that point, we were really starting to try and clarify with staff some language around mission and purpose, because we needed to kind of get the organization pointing in one direction, and lockdown and the various lockdowns felt a good opportunity to do that. So it did start then. We restructured parts of the organization, what sat in what department, and that led to the arrival of some new colleagues on the executive team. End of last year, start of this year, and that's really when we got stuck into how we wanted to take our vision of transforming access to our public programs, to screen culture, and to jobs, and how we would take that vision and manifest itself in a strategy, and set ourselves the challenge of that strategy itself wrestling, as you've said, quite a lot of complexity in the organization that has evolved over the last decade, taking on the functions of the UK Film Council. And I think I would say that this strategy is a kind of a sign of us reaching kind of full maturity in that breadth of roles. And rather than just having lottery here, charity here, lead body here, really start to think about how all those levers work in a much more interconnected way, so that where we have less national lottery funding to support a couple of areas that we've historically funded, film fund, for example, a little bit less money. Let's not think about it in isolation, and let's think about it in terms of the other policy levers that we pull alongside that, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess the objective was to try and make sense of us. And I hope, even though it's a complex document, that it makes sense.
Yeah, and it's very forward-looking, but also it seems to offer a renewed commitment to the historic foundational educational and cultural roles that BFI has played. So is that something that you discussed very early on as well together about whether was that a fundamental target with this?
I think we wanted to bring some of those historic elements of the BFI back to the centre of the organisation. So you'll see that the BFI National Archive plays a really central role in the strategy, as does our ambitions around education, because the broader sort of philosophical concept, I would say, is in the title, which is how do we take this very kind of proliferated screen culture that everyone is engaging with in very different ways all the time, and enhance its value in the eyes of decision makers, policy makers, parents, creative practitioners, etc. So it felt that the archive and education work and other parts of the BFI would benefit the entire system if we gave them the energy they needed.
Yeah. Harriet, is there anything you'd like to add on the...
Yeah, I'll just come in on the lottery strategy side of things. So obviously that was something that we did slightly differently because it's national lottery funding, it's public funding. And we went out to consultation actually about 13 months ago now. And we very much took an approach of an absolutely blank sheet of paper this time around. We obviously knew we were going in with around a 10% reduction. But we also wanted to take the opportunity to actually start from scratch. Again, having had 2 iterations of a strategy. And one of the reasons for that is we were coming off the back of COVID, coming out of what had been an incredibly difficult time for the sector. We had seen the 2 areas really with the biggest pressure, which were obviously independent film and skills. So we commissioned big reviews of both of those as well, which have really informed the shape of the strategy and how we've allocated the funding. And then obviously also as we were building the strategy, you've got a cost of living crisis emerging and growing. And then actually obviously the moment that we launched the strategy, we now have a currency crisis as well. So not that lottery funding is really definitely not there to answer all those questions, but we have very much anchored this strategy, which I think you will see far more around public benefit, thinking very much about the difference that we can make to individuals' lives, and moving away from anything sort of slightly more, where we might have been thinking about more organisational support. This is very, very definitely anchored very, very strongly in the kind of cultural, social benefit that lottery funding can bring to the sector.
Thank you. And so we're going to move on to some of the reader questions now. One thing that for also stood out to me is the embrace of video games in quite a substantial way in the strategy documents. And I just wonder if you could share with us why video games are seen as such an important part of the new strategy, and what ways you see the BFI engaging with this sector. I mean, for instance, you point out in the document that high-end TV projects wouldn't receive funding support because there are robust opportunities in the marketplace that already exist. Isn't that a similar case with the video game industry, or is it that your aim is to make more culturally British video games by being involved in this sector? Ben, do you want to take that one?
Do you want to start on the culture, and I can do on what we're planning to do?
Sure. Okay. Well, I think the first thing to say is that there's a lot of enthusiasm and interest and practitioners around the video game space within the BFI that have been sort of hidden, a sort of hidden layer within the BFI. And we started talking with everyone before COVID about what our role could be. And it was interesting to me how much enthusiasm there was for the cultural role of video games as part of a continued narrative of the development of moving image narrative storytelling. So we're really curious about it. I think you're right that it's been difficult to identify what the market failure, so to speak, is, or where we as the BFI could add value beyond where the obvious sort of headspace goes to, which is funding. So, should we collect it? Should we program it? How do we sort of bring it into the narrative around screen culture, and then maybe specifically where you might look to support cultural diversity in storytelling, which is often where kind of where you get led to with market failure. So I think we're starting to appreciate what our role can be. We just don't necessarily have the resources we need at the moment, and we're really clear about that in the strategy. And I think it's really important to say that when we embarked on the consultation around this strategy, there was obviously a lot of anxiety from our traditional beneficiary community, for e.g. independent filmmakers and producers, who were rightly worried that we might be diluting what was already a really challenged space. So we went into this process very much eyes wide open around that. And that's why the strategy is really outlining what we need to do before we can fully engage. So Harriet, maybe you pick up there.
That's great. I mean, to say it's not, we haven't got the funding, and we're very clear on that in terms of thinking about investing and making more cultural games, but it's very much thinking around how we can set out the cultural significance of games, which is something that we really feel is underplayed. So as Ben said, it's thinking across everything we do, from programs to collection. And then when we're thinking about the lottery funding and how we'll invest to support in the early stages, we're going to sort of play to our strengths of areas where we do have expertise, and it feels sensible for us to sort of dip our toes in and get to understand the sector more, and really sort of credibly be able to speak and work with the game sector. So the first piece of work we're doing is coming off the back of the Film and High-End TV Skills Review. As we announced at that point that we will be doing a Film and High-End video games review as well, which will look at the skill shortages behind video games, VFX, virtual production, animation, which will be undertaken as our first kind of core piece of work. So very much playing to our policy strengths, our research strengths, also thinking across diversity, inclusion, sustainability as well, and thinking actually what we'll learn through that is actually where is there a need, where is the market failure, and where is there a need for further public investment.
Thank you. And this touches a little bit on the next question, which was sent in by somebody. It says the new strategy seems to have a central tension, which is that by moving to meet the UK population where it is, i.e. on any screen, games, VR, TikTok, YouTube, the BFI is moving away from supporting UK independent filmmaking makers and organizations. You also have to do more with less. So how does that tension get resolved, if that's possible? And can you talk a little bit about how, the continued support of the UK independent filmmaking industry, or do you see the BFI diversifying away from that with this new strategy?
I don't think it's a tension. We are, as I just said, we're very clear at the moment that we know where our support is needed. We've got less money than we had in previous strategy rounds, and we're really conscious that we don't dilute that unnecessarily. So we are absolutely making the case for additional resources to meet the broader ambition. At the same time, I'd say the world doesn't stand still, and there are lots of creative people and generations coming up who are of both creative people and audiences who are really diverse in what they watch and where they watch it. So I think in terms of ensuring that we have a sustainable creative sector, including our independent sector, I feel it's quite incumbent on us as the lead body to make sure that we're supporting a diversification of how people make and watch screen culture. So I think it's definitely going to be a tension for those who work in one space and may see that they've got access to a very limited resource. But I think our job is to make it feel not like a tension and like a sort of a bigger ecology. The national lottery funding that we've got cannot do everything for everybody. It never has been able to. So going back to my first point about how we make sure that the BFI is, and by the way, the BFI also can't do everything. So, but within what we can do, whether it's the economic review of independent film recommendations, whether it's lottery, whether it's the tax reliefs, whether it's the distribution funds we've got, that we support where we can, and we have to diversify that.
Yeah. Harriet, would you want to add anything on that?
No, I think really just to say is that in this, we very much looked in the round at all the levers we can use to address the issues that came up through the consultation, and not all of them are funding. So that is very much, looking at actually in balance, where can we support really long-term significant structural change to support the industry that isn't just through National Lottery funding. So they need to be sort of seen in the round, I think is what I'm saying.
Yeah, because I know when you undertook this strategy, you obviously consulted a lot of people out in the public. You did a sort of multi-city tour across the UK. Speaking tour, and also a number of people, obviously practitioners in the industry. On that side of things, what was the feedback you got, for instance, from the public about BFI Film Fund projects? Did you feel there was an engagement? Did people know about the films? I mean, what was your feedback on that side of things when you were doing the consultations?
We obviously actually also had the benefit of Mia coming in just at the beginning of the consultation process. So we had actually an incredibly rich amount of feedback in terms of the film fund, because Mia also did her own listening tour, which was running sort of at the same time that Ben and I were sort of out on the road, and we were involved in online consultations. I think in terms of then we had the independent film report as well, obviously, and we also, in terms of work that we're doing on evaluation as well on a number of the different projects. So an awful lot of very rich information coming in. And I think, the role that we play in terms of talent development, new voices, impactful stories for audiences is something that we've very much honed in on, in terms of actually what role can we play if we're thinking about actually someone's career, trajectory of career from independent through something else, potentially, is where do we have a role to play in terms, particularly around that piece in terms of people, new entrants, not just early stage new entrants, but people coming into the industry. But I don't know if you want to touch that.
Well, yeah, I think Mia, hopefully what you'll see in Mia's strategy is a response to the listening tour that she went on. She definitely identified some gaps in provision. So, for example, there was, I don't know, Mia, I'm sure Mia will come and do something more specific with you at some point, but there was definitely felt a gap in provision around sort of higher end, higher budgeted shorts, and that there were some kind of rungs missing in the ladder that she was really keen to close, because she's very, very focused on access and opportunity and sort of equality of opportunity. I think there was probably a little bit of, as always, a bit of scrutiny around who are we making films for, and how do you balance that tension of talent development where the audience can be quite small, and a desire for the audiences for the films to feel kind of larger and the films to feel more open and commercial. And I think Mia will be really good at squaring that away. And then there was a strong sense from the people we engage with who access the fund to please make it easier. So, which is
how do you do that?
Well, look, there's always a certain amount of form filling involved in applying for public funding or any kind of money. But we have made some commitments in the strategy around being, good partners and good funders, and making sure that we're really clear why we're asking a question, and only asking for information that we're going to be able to do something with. So Mia and the team are absolutely, and actually across the lottery teams, are going on a sort of journey now of a process now of looking at all of our sort of forms and evaluation processes to try and make it feel less, barriered.
Right. Okay. So easier application. Easier is probably not the right word, but a less, less onerous, I suppose, in some ways, application process. But could you talk?
I think, sorry, Matt, I guess just on that point also, we want everyone to be able to access funds and our programs and screen culture equally, and that means recognizing that not everyone articulates their kind of creative practice, for example, in the same way, and we need to meet people on their terms rather than expecting everyone to meet us on our terms. So there's definitely some work to be done to sort of travel towards each other.
And I'm aware a lot of that work is being done now, and you know, the strategy around that won't be revealed until next April. However, we have received some questions about the changes to the film fund, and I just don't know if you're able to say anything now. But one of the questions is, in what crucial ways will the BFI Filmmaking Fund be different to the BFI Film Fund? Will you be funding fewer films with more money, given how much budgets are now inflated? Will Mia Bay's job title be changing to director of the BFI Filmmaking Fund? That's the important question, of course. No, but seriously, the other question is in what fundamental ways might the fund change? What can you say at this stage about that?
I mean, I think the detail will come out in the guidelines, which will come out later this year. So, I mean, some of that, the real detail is still being worked through. But I think it will be more targeted focus than it has been probably to date, which is obviously there is a little bit more, well, it's a bit less money, which obviously means that we need to think harder about what the impacts are going to be. We're not thinking about sort of big box office audience numbers and impacts, but really about quality in terms of impacts with audience. And, you know, as I said before, it's very much around thinking about the entire kind of filmmaking team and the careers as well. So really kind of big focus in terms of the talent development pipeline piece as well. So I think if we could kind of think of the sort of impacts that we wanted to have, and you look at our sort of big objectives and our outcomes, is really about that sort of talent creative development process that we support through the Filmmaking Fund. But in terms of the exact details, not able to share those just yet.
Okay, Ben, anything you could add to that, or that you think is worth sharing at this stage?
I will say that I think the talent development role of the Film Fund, as it is with the public service broadcasters, is really, I think sometimes it's not as understood as it could be. If you turn on any UK produced Netflix show, for example, it's very likely that the showrunners, the writers, the directors have been supported with public funding in some way or another before they've made it to those jobs. And I think we don't always sort of talk about that as much as we could. And obviously that is a role across sort of shorts, talent development programs, first features, where the audience impact might be less, but the creative impact, the professional impact is really high. So I think that's got to continue, because that's a really important function of lottery. But I know that Mia is really keen, as Harriet says, to make the audience impact felt, and for audiences to trust that lottery money is being supported to invest in films that audiences will want to see.
Okay, thank you. One of the key parts of the strategy is obviously looking at skills, and I know you both feel that's extremely important. So, as identified in the recent BFI skills review, skills shortages in the UK screen sectors are a threat, while at the same time bullying and harassment among the workforce is seen as endemic by some. Can you discuss your key proposals around addressing these issues? I'm aware they're very different, but in particular, what seemed to be an indication that you might want to bring a 1% skills levy to any production spend in the UK. So can you expand on those different areas? Ben, can we start with you on that one?
Well, just firstly, just to say that I think there's no intention to levy.
Okay.
So
levy is the wrong word.
No, but it's a common word that one might expect to use, but we haven't approached it from a levying perspective. So I think, look, skills goes right to the heart of the strategy around access to opportunities and access to jobs. So you'll see at the heart of screen culture is a sort of determination to have the opportunity and the benefit understood from a school age upwards. And maybe we'll talk about education a bit, I don't know, but clearly that's critical, that everyone understands the sheer range of opportunities that are available that I don't think are well understood, and that will meet the challenge of the sector that is struggling to fill every job. So we've got a kind of nice problem to have in a way, which is that it feels like it should be an incredibly attractive industry to enter. We've got lots of jobs, but people don't know. So we just need to close that gap down. And again, our lottery money, which has for a long time done quite a lot of the heavy lifting through partnerships with the likes of ScreenSkills, is really, really key, but it's not enough. And the skills review work that we did identified a training bill that went way, way beyond the kind of capacity of the public purse. And that's quite right as well, because this is a big industry now. So the 1%, which maybe Harriet can talk a bit about that and sort of future plans, is really sort of born from that concept that we've now reached a point where this is industrial level training and communication job that's needed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm happy to comment. So in terms of the 1%, if you think sort of, I think we equate it's roughly around sort of £100 million problem that we have in terms of skills. And I mean, in terms of the skills strategy, it's about sort of £5-6 million that we have got available to invest in that particular area. There are some absolutely fantastic interventions in terms of there's so much going already in industry. And actually what we're thinking about in terms of that 1%, so 100 million equals 1%, thinking about actually there's a lot of work that people are doing already. So actually, how do we kind of quantify that, join it up, share information, knowledge transfer on that? How do we put national lottery funding to best work? Because actually, obviously, we can't solve the big problem. So I think the skills review set out really clear role for where lottery sits versus the £100 million problem, and also where we sit as an organisation who actually we've got this lead body role. We sit very neatly between industry and government in terms of being able to broker ways of looking creatively at this as a kind of long-term solution to a problem that we really need to work out. So where we focused on lottery, just being very, very clear, is the issue of bullying and harassment, industry practices, retention in the industry just came out again and again in our consultation and in the skills review, and was absolutely something that's a kind of perfect example of where lottery public benefit good cause funding is really perfectly placed to make a difference. So you'll see some of the skills programs are very much addressing that. A lot of them are addressing Ben's issue in terms of people not understanding how to get into the industry. So a big kind of piece on careers. And then the skills clusters, because one of the things we know is that there's a sort of huge magnetic draw to London and South East. Yet there are a lot of really successful production hubs who are just in terms of how you develop your local talent, joining up education, training initiatives to production bases locally. So I think that's one of our new, and we feel really exciting programs that's going to come out of the strategy, is looking at really shoring up production and crew across the UK.
Thank you. But just so I can understand the 1% a little bit more as it is in the document, is that going to be something that you want as a voluntary contribution from industry? Because I know obviously ScreenSkills has had frustrations around, maybe not all productions, giving funding towards sort of skills training for them. But is that the number, the figure you mentioned, is that going to be a voluntary, hopefully something that the industry does voluntarily? Is that the idea?
So that's something, yeah, as you say, you're absolutely right. I mean, the ScreenSkills levy is a really important component, by the way, sitting alongside lottery funding in terms of how those all contribute towards the 1% number. The next step on this is to bring together, working with DCMS, a task and finish group to look at exactly that question of the 1%. What is it? Actually, obviously, voluntary is where we're starting. We're going to have a look at where we are in terms of how much funding is already being spoken. As I say, there are lots of brilliant initiatives and what more might be done, but it very definitely is a sort of industry-led solution, and we have a sort of brokering role sitting between the two, and that work will kick off probably sort of mid to late October with DCMS.
Matt, sorry, I don't think you said this, Harriet. Apologies if you did. We're not proposing there's going to be a sort of new collecting body for a 1%. So right. It will be different insofar as it's a calculation of what needs to be invested in training. Much of that for example, with studios, we would probably expect them to just demonstrate how they are investing that 1% in training programs. So it's not at the moment, there's no sense of centralizing that.
Sure. In terms of your own list of priorities, I assume this one has particular urgency given the ongoing shortages that are flagged all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we calculated the sort of the skills need for the next 3 years was in the sort of 10,000s. So we've already started this work.
Thank you. And you touched a little bit on this, but we had a question about, I guess, expanding outside of the Southeast. It says this document commits to serving the whole UK and suggests this includes appointing staff from outside Southeast England. Could you explain how this would work? Is there any plan to follow the examples of Channel 4 and BBC and open offices across the UK to assist levelling up?
I mean, should I take it sort of? I can start if you like, Harriet. I mean, firstly, we're becoming quite decentralized as an organization. We've taken a very agile approach to future working, and we're not pulling everybody back to office spaces. That's already started to impact in terms of how we're recruiting and where our colleagues are based. So our exec director of finance, for example, we recruited in Glasgow, and she lives just outside Glasgow, and we recruited Jason Wood as director of public programs and audiences, and he remains a resident of Manchester. So it's happening somewhat organically. We haven't yet taken a decision to sort of lift staff and move them. I mean, I have to say, I'm sure anyone at Channel 4 would tell you that they're really brutal exercises, and you've got to be, and lots of people are impacted by them, and they cost a lot of money to do. And we don't have the luxury of money, that's for sure. So I think we are thinking about how that might work through networks and the decentralizing of funding that Harriet can speak to. But in terms of people and offices, obviously we did have a small office emerging with the Young Audiences Content Fund in Manchester, which sadly closed after its 3-year pilot. So I think that was definitely the start of a hub for people. I think for now it's going to be through lottery funding and where the expertise attached to that lottery funding might come. But that's maybe Harriet, you pick that up.
Yeah. So I think important to point out, as well as our core objectives of funding and the funds obviously that we're funding, is that every single fund is underpinned by 3 core principles. So equity, diversity, inclusion, improving sustainability, but also UK-wide. And this is a very conscious decision that was made, I mean, really through consultation, through what we learned through the last strategy. We've established these really incredibly, great networks through Fan and Network in terms of talent development and audience development, which worked really, really well in the last strategy. So those remain in place, and we'll be building on those. And it's very much about actually being more flexible with how we fund with those funded partners, and thinking about how we can devolve more decision making outside London and the Southeast, and actually giving sort of more power in terms of, as I say, particularly decision money. The flexibility, particularly for the audience fund, allows people to work sort of in a far more kind of closer way with the communities that they work with, rather than sort of from a sort of central, this is how we expect it to be spent. The other thing, which I think again is really, really important, is the work that we have been doing with devolved nations. So the context is different across devolved nations, and we're very, very kind of explicit in terms of when we go out for funding. If we have a UK-wide delivery partner, is they will be very much expected to work very closely with the devolved nations in terms of understanding the context in which they're working. So UK-wide has sort of many different meanings in terms of how we're going to fund, but it absolutely expressly will see more funding going outside London and the Southeast, and more decision making taking place outside London and the Southeast as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. So one thing you stated in your intro to the strategy, Ben, is that you want BFI to become a digital first organization. Clearly, part of that is the rebirth of BFI Player as BFI Plus. So can you talk a little bit about what your ambitions are for that? Do you see it as becoming a competitive platform in the streaming market and also a significant source of income for the BFI?
Yes, we do. Well, I think digital first. We're saying like to our staff, we're saying digital first, not digital only. But I think digital first is quite key to us from a kind of cultural imperative, because we can reach so many more people with programs, and inevitably when you're sort of geo-locked into the South Bank with a venue, for example, that's quite limiting. So it's absolutely a combination of what we learned from lockdown about the ability for our digital program output to just reach far and wide, and even the fact that we could frankly do stuff like this, and much of the strategy consultation and launch we were able to do digitally, just really equalized the relationship we could have with stakeholders and public stakeholders across the country. So it's definitely a cultural imperative, and you're right that it is potentially a very significant source of income for the BFI. We've got a good streaming audience. We've got a good base of subscribers, and we've done a lot of work to try and model how the growth in that potential audience, and that's really important to us because we are in significant need of income generation for ourselves in order to keep delivering on our work. So the player to plus is an attempt to describe what we think it will be, which is less just about a kind of linear streaming service and more about how you can access more of the BFI in multiple ways, which will definitely be a program of films and other moving image work. But also we do loads of talks and events at the South Bank, and some of them are available on YouTube, but not all of them are. We've got brilliant program notes that accompany every film if you walk into a screening at the South Bank. We've got 90 years of writing in Sight and Sound, some of which is available online, some of which isn't. The riches of the archive. So I think we feel that it's got quite a unique place potentially for audiences to make it worth their however much it'll cost. And then we'll try and connect that with a sort of broader sort of membership. We'll look again at sort of what does it mean to be a member of the BFI or a subscriber to the BFI? Because some people have a Sight and Sound subscription, some people have a BFI Player subscription, some people are members of the South Bank. And they're all kind of quite siloed communities. So it's a big opportunity for us.
And so this is going to be a significant investment as well, correct, Harriet? This is going to be a big project.
It is a big project, indeed. In fact, it is.
What's the timeline for it? Sorry, what were you going to say? That, in fact, it's the.
No, it's going to be a very big project. I was going to hand back to Ben actually in terms of the BFI Plus.
We're in the process of developing the business model for it so that we can seek investment in it. Essentially, we're treating it like a bit of it's not a startup, but a sort of scale up within the BFI. And that means it won't be something we can entirely remotely fund from our existing envelope. So we're treating it like an investment opportunity.
Yeah, it's not lottery or grant and aid funded.
Right, okay. And is it too soon to say whether you'll scale up acquisition ambition in terms of acquiring feature films, for instance, to sort of show on the platform? I mean, is that going to be a bigger part of the future BFI Plus?
I think it might be bigger. I think we've definitely found that acquisitions of titles like Bait or After Love have proven to be really popular on the player and good drivers of subscribers to the player. We have a kind of, I think there is a tension here probably with the sector in terms of there are differences of opinion as to whether, how acquisitive should we be in the market. And I do think we want to make sure that we're kind of cognizant of our role, but that we can also be a really helpful investor in film, and we've got a really significant platform for audiences. So I definitely want us to be acquisitive because I think that'll help independent film, and majority of our acquisitions are British independent films.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So moving on to a question about the BFI London Film Festival, which is a landmark cultural event in the UK that now faces funding challenges for its next edition, as highlighted in the report, in particular around the national lottery funding through the Section 27 mechanism. What are the plans to address that gap? And is the vision for LFF going to need to change significantly given these challenges?
So the LFF is I think it's growing in prominence, it's growing in importance. And we've done lots of work to open it up. And it's not just the London Film Festival. There are opportunities online and nationally to experience it. So, and we've introduced in the last couple of years a really successful immersive strand to the festival, which we are also now introducing a version of throughout the year. So we've got real ambitions for LFF, and I think that it's becoming far more significant on the awards calendar. Distributors are accessing it much more in terms of the awards conversation, and it's always done a brilliant job of profiling emerging talent as well. So I would say on that basis, we feel entirely committed to it, and we feel entirely committed to its sort of growth as well. So there isn't really a version of it that delivers what we want to deliver on a sort of shrunk back version. And also the economics of it don't really work. Once you need a certain amount of seats. So for example, when there was a point where Odeon Leicester Square became a slightly challenging central venue for us because it had less seats when it did its refurbishment and went to a Lux model. So, we learned a lot about the economics of it. The challenge we've got is that we have been living with an element of the funding via lottery, which is something of a hangover for when the Film Council was able to fund the BFI with lottery, and then we took on the lottery role, and then you can't fund yourselves with lottery, so you have to jump through hoops to access some lottery, and that process has now run out. So there's a challenge there for us, but we're in conversations with the board, with DCMS. It's a bit of kind of financial modelling that needs to be done. I think we feel really committed to the model that we're in, and so we've just got to make that work for the long term, because it is one of the parts of the BFI that every few years feels like it needs to be kind of refinanced, and we want to get beyond that because it's so central to us.
Are you able to say at this stage where that funding might come from for next year in particular? Because obviously it already feels so close, doesn't it? Even though obviously the 2022 festival happens next month, but it feels like you're probably already planning 2023 in some ways. So I just wonder where you are with that side of things.
Yeah, I mean, not really, but only because it's part of a much bigger piece of work that we're doing to look at all of our finances and the challenges that we've got, and make sure that they're distributed in a way across our grant and aid funding, our lottery funding, the money that we make for ourselves, so that it can deliver all the things that we're prioritizing in the strategy. So there's a sort of bigger challenge that we're working out, and the LFF is a challenge within it. So it's a bigger bit of financial mapping.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna ask maybe one more question, and then I might just switch over to some of the viewer questions, just so we can get through a few of those. But One of the things you highlight is in terms of the educational aspect of the strategy. One of the most ambitious things seems to advocate for screen culture to become part of the curriculum across the UK. And I just wonder what steps are you planning to take to achieve that goal?
Well, by the way, firstly, by saying it, because I don't think we've said that for a long time, and actually I think we felt that as the lead body and an advocate for screen culture, we should be advocating for its value, and that its value is fully kind of understood and used. So that's an obvious step one. It's quite an ambitious proposal, because the curriculum is the curriculum and it's quite locked, and I don't think this should necessarily be misinterpreted as aiming to sort of have it sort of fully locked as a kind of core curriculum subject. But through our conversations internally and during our consultation on the strategy, it just became unavoidable that screen culture and the use of screens and the use of moving image is so central to how we communicate with each other, how we express ourselves, how we learn and gain knowledge, that we've got to sort of take that and own it and celebrate that, because we think that young people are using their phone like we may have read books. And moving image and storytelling becomes a real kind of text. And TikTok, which we talk a bit about, not to just kind of throw it in there, but actually because a really interesting sort of grammar of storytelling is emerging. And I don't think the people who are doing it necessarily know that's what they're doing. So they feel like things to be embraced and enhanced, whilst also recognizing that, anything that you spend too long with carries harms as well. So I think what we say in the strategy is that we need a strategy for this particular area, because it's too big for us to have kind of arrived at it by the time we needed to publish this. So we'll be centralizing it, and it will be strategy and tactics. I think there's quite a lot to work through in terms of how do we raise the profile and get it in front of Department for Education as well as DCMS and other kind of key stakeholders in that conversation. So we're definitely at the start of that piece of work, but I'm really pleased that we're saying it, and everyone I've spoken to has been really pleased that we're saying it, because it seems so key.
Yeah. I'm going to switch over to some of the questions from the viewers watching. So the first one is, can you discuss how the reduction in lottery funding will affect your development funding in particular? Will direct project development loans be capped?
I mean, all the detail of the mechanics of all our funds. Sorry.
I think we missed the part of that, Harriet.
Oh, sorry. So all the absolute detail in terms of how the funds will be kind of structured is not going to be out until the early new year.
Okay.
At the moment. We haven't got any further detail on that,
Okay.
just other than in the document.
There's a follow-up question about the recoupment, the BFI corridor recoupment facility, and whether that will change. Is there anything you can say about that at this stage?
It is being looked at, so we are looking at it. I don't think we have got further than that at this stage, but the you mean, Matt, you mean the sort of the lockbox?
The lockbox, yeah, the lockbox, yeah.
We have done some evaluation work on the lockbox and the film fund, and the film fund evaluation is coming out soon. And I think that Mia and the finance team are taking that to sort of really understand impact. Yeah. Is it working in the way it's working, or is there another way to share the lottery benefit better? So again, sorry, we're slightly pushing it down the road because there was a bit of time between now and March, but this feels like a great one to bring Mia back on at some point.
Sure. I think the subtext of that question is, given the pressure, the financial pressure, might that be something that needs to be reviewed?
I mean, I think we talk about a new deal for filmmakers as part of the strategy. And I think it's very much making sure, as Ben said, taking all that we've got, which just there's a little bit more work to be done before we bring people in on it, is just thinking about making sure that, as you say, with a smaller amount of funding, that the funding is absolutely being targeted where it absolutely is most needed at the moment. So that is, but also taking into account everything we learned through the independent film review, everything we heard on the listening tour. So there are a lot of different factors in terms of thinking about that, what might be in or out. So we're looking at a new deal for producers.
Okay, thank you. I think we slightly touched on this a little bit earlier, but probably not in great detail. This is a question about the bullying and harassment, question in the industry. It says many will not come forward to report bullying or harassment unless the victim can be provided with a lawyer. Is this something that the BFI is looking at particularly?
Well, we're looking at it insofar as we have seconded Jen Smith to the formation of the Independent Standards Authority, which I think you reported on a couple of weeks ago. So I think there's been many conversations happening around bullying and harassment, and some proposals emerged around this notion of the ISA, the Independent Standards Authority, which would provide a sort of neutral ground for these conversations to take place. So we thought it was fitting, given that Jen had been involved in quite a lot of the bullying and harassment work in some post-Weinstein with BAFTA, that our contribution to that work is that she goes to the ISA and starts to work through those challenges. And that is being sort of born out of, I think, a kind of legal concept, where kind of legal protections and a kind of legal provision is involved. And alongside that, we'll continue to deliver on our work around our principles and guidance for bullying and harassment. But I think the ISA hopefully will become quite a sort of force for good there.
Great, thank you. So a question about the talent and development. So do you envisage expanding the talent development opportunities by encouraging the establishment of something like the Sundance Institute with its various programs for filmmakers and writers? Is that something that you're considering or looking at?
Not identically. What we do have is a new Creative Challenge Fund, which is something new in terms of thinking about talent development opportunities. Going to be like literally much more flexible in terms of people who've got really exciting projects, which will be able to come in, ask for lottery funding in terms of thinking about, say, new projects, new talent labs, and they very, very much a view that they should be hosted across the UK, so giving people an opportunity outside sort of the normal infrastructure to set up their own kind of talent development as well, alongside what we already do kind of formally through the our network funds as well. So I would look out for more information on the Creative Challenge Fund when that comes out and the sort of projects we support with that.
Fantastic, thank you. Got a question here. So how will Screen Culture 2033 address the issue of systemic racism within your organization? Ben, do you mind taking that one?
No, not at all. So we've actually been doing some work inside the organization, with very live work around anti-racism. And I think the first part of that piece of work was acknowledging that systemic racism exists within institutions like the BFI. So let's take that as a given. And now I think we go on what is a very sort of long journey of recognizing harms that have been felt by colleagues in the organization, building up greater accountability amongst ourselves, and sort of growing in our confidence to deal with it. So we're doing we're doing a lot of work with the leadership team at the moment. I hope that what you'll see expressed in the strategy is, a recognition of culture change, and within that explicitly our ambition to be a really consciously inclusive employer. And that work that we're doing should equally be felt externally by people who come to us as audiences, or people who come to us as creatives. So I think, if anything, what I've learned over my time at the BFI is that it's quite easy to react out of panic and fear very quickly to challenges, and sometimes they cause just as much harm. So I think we're just trying to be really open, really take accountability, and that will start to move us in the right direction. And I think we have really tried to express some of that in the strategy, along with something slightly more sort of tangible around, universal targets, which we'll report on much more frequently and transparently. We're working on, further iterations of the diversity standards, which continue to need to be sort of pushed and challenged to have value. So yeah, we're working on it, but I think we need to move away of pretending that we're not it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. And I think this is possibly a good one to finish on. We don't have that much time left. So how and when can we know the strategy is working? Will there be public evaluations along the way, for example? So how are you going to measure the success of rolling out your Screen Culture 2033 strategy? Harriet, do you want to start with that?
Yeah,
one?
I can start with that. So on the last page of the Screen Culture kind of gives you a quick summary in terms of how we're going to report. So there are two ways. There's one which is quite formal, which is the National Lottery Funding Strategy, which has a much more structured, formal framework for evaluation reporting, which is really detailed. So I'm not going to go into that now. But the other thing that we're going to do is we have launched the strategy in our digital first world on a blogging site. And we are going to be absolutely committed to keeping people updated in terms of where we are on projects as we go. So I think you hopefully will be transparent, will admit where things have worked, where things may not have worked, where we're work in progress. And it'll be a place really for us to keep people updated. But Ben, you might want to say more on that.
Well, I think there's sort of hard evaluation, and then there's transparency. So we will definitely, by the way, evaluation is sort of very time consuming and very expensive. So it's something you have to really be focused on doing. It takes up an incredible amount of time. And I hope that one of the values of moving to a 10-year strategy is that we, even though it feels longer, it means we can sort of iterate within it. And sort of check in on ourselves more regularly. But we have got to do better at that. And then the point about the sort of the blog and us kind of reporting back with videos is just to create more porosity between users of the BFI and the BFI. So, and actually we brought someone in from Neil Williams, who joined us as our exec director of technology and digital transformation. Comes from a brilliant place of porosity and regular engagement with your user groups. He was one of the kind of architects of gov.uk, and he's really being the exec, he's definitely being the advocate for ongoing agile communication with your users, which will feel quite transformative over time, I think, for everyone who looks at us and how we talk. But we've got to get into that rhythm now, I think.
Well, that unfortunately brings us to the end of our hour. I just want to say thank you very much, both Harriet and Ben, for being so open and sharing so many more insights into the document. I would say anybody who hasn't had a chance to read it yet, please do. It's really fantastic and comprehensive and very ambitious piece of work. And I'm very excited to see all these ambitions kind of realized in the next few years. So good luck to both of you with all the many things you will have on your plate, bringing this mission to fulfillment. So, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks, Ben and
Thank
Harriet.
you. Thank
All
you.
right, see you both soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.